apologies to those of you who know about the basics of the Health Impact Fund project. I'll talk a little bit about that and give you the latest update on where we stand with it. So there is a general sort of point about human progress. Human progress depends on two different things. On the one hand, it depends on innovation, and on the other hand, on the dissemination or diffusion or uptake of that innovation. And these two elements have to both be there in order for real progress to take place. And that leads to an obvious dilemma. The dilemma is that we accelerate innovation by giving incentives, in particular through temporary monopolies, such as patents and copyrights. But precisely those patents and copyrights then increase the price of the innovation and thereby hamper or impede its diffusion. A wonderful example of that, and a very important example of that, is in the area of pharmaceuticals, where we have the TRIPS agreement already discussed, where we now have these 20-year product patents that are supposed to incentivize innovation. This system spread through the TRIPS agreement pretty much to all countries, or at least the effects have been spread to all countries, does poorly in regard to three different aspects. On the one hand, or first, universal access is gravely impeded, even in affluent countries, by the large markups that patents entail. Pharmaceutical companies will price their products in order to maximize profit, of course, and profit is the markup from cost to price, the difference between cost and price, which is here in the vertical dimension, multiplied by the sales volume, which is here in the horizontal dimension. So they want to maximize the rectangle that goes from the price over to the demand curve, then down to the cost curve, the blue dots, and then back to the y-axis. And you can see that if, as in the world today, inequality of income is very high, then the profit maximizing price is also going to be very high. In plain English, it's not going to be worth it to lower the price so as to be able to sell to 40, 50, 60% of the world's population, because the reduction in price that you would have to accept in order to do that will lose you more money than the increase in your customer base. So you maximize the rectangle in this example here by selling at 100 or way above. You get a thin rectangle, but a very tall one, and that's going to be worth more money than going down to a price like 30 or 25 and so on. Inequality within countries now is also very high, and so you have the same problem within countries, even if you can sell your product at different prices in different countries, which is difficult because of the parallel import problem, that drugs get re-imported into the rich countries. But even if you could prevent that, the majority of human beings is quite naturally excluded from advanced medicine under the TRIPS regime. The second problem is that innovation is focused on the diseases of the rich. It will ignore the diseases of the poor, simply because even if you have a wonderful drug for such a disease like malaria or schistosomiasis or whatever, you face a Hobson's choice between either selling it at the usual 60-fold markup, in which case you have no customers, or selling it at a much lower markup, in which case you have also got small profits. Better than to focus on hair loss or trivial skin problems that rich people are willing to pay to have resolved for them. A third problem is, and that's actually in some sense good news, is that the overall efficiency of the system is greatly diminished by all the costs that arise from lobbying, gaming, patenting, litigation, wasteful marketing and counterfeiting, and the huge deadweight losses. These losses, you can sort of more or less quantify them, deadweight losses excluded, by thinking about how much does the world spend on medicines. That's about $1 trillion. And how much of that money goes right back into R&D, research and development on the one hand, or manufacturing of drugs on the other, and that's less than $200 billion. So there's a huge amount of waste, and that's not all profit to the pharma companies. A lot of that is litigation, a lot of that is competitive advertising, where companies with functionally similar drugs are fighting over the terrain, each one trying to increase its market share and so on. So a great deal of waste is in there, unless you, of course, you're a pharma, an advertising executive or a lawyer where you think this might be nice that we are spending so much money on these things. So the Health Impact Fund is a solution to this problem, to this dilemma between innovation and access. It is complementary to TRIPS because TRIPS is very difficult to change, as we already heard. And it calls for voluntary registration, or the possibility of voluntary registration of any new medicine with the Health Impact Fund. And any registered medicine would then participate for 10 consecutive years in annual fixed award pools. There's an amount of money available, let's say $6 billion each year, and each year that money is divided among registered products in proportion to the health impact they achieve in that year. So if you have a product on the Health Impact Fund, and if that product accounts for 8% of all the health gains achieved by Health Impact Fund registered products in a given year, then you get 8% of the reward money in that year. That repeats for a period of 10 years, and at the end of the 10 years, you will have had your reward and the product goes generic, like products do now when their patent expires. Now, the $6 billion would be publicly funded, but there would also be considerable savings because any country that participates in funding the Health Impact Fund would be getting the product at a much, much lower price, namely at cost. That's the thing that pharmaceutical companies, in order to capture these rewards, would have to give up. So they can keep the intellectual property rights, but they have to sell the product at the lowest feasible cost of manufacture and distribution. So for you guys, if the United States became a member and contributed to the Health Impact Fund, then you would pay, as taxpayers, you would contribute to the cost of the Health Impact Fund to maintaining these reward pools, but you would, on the other hand, also enjoy cheaper medicines, at least insofar as these are Health Impact Fund registered. The requirement to sell at cost would mean the following. Pharmaceutical companies with products on the Health Impact Fund would be required to put the production, the manufacture of the product out for tender. Any reliable generic company manufacturing drugs could bid for the contract. The lowest cost bid or the two lowest cost bids would be accepted, and the pharma company would then buy the product from these low-cost manufacturers and sell them at the very same price on to wholesalers. So would make no money at all on the manufacture or distribution of the drug, would make all its money exclusively on the health impact that the drug achieves. So let's go through the three problems that we mentioned. The first problem of high prices is avoided, obviously, because any product on the Health Impact Fund would be sold at cost. And that would be a very, very cheap price because, of course, the manufacture of drugs is quite cheap. Mass production is quite cheap. In some cases, the pharmaceutical company would actually have incentives to sell the drug below cost. And that would happen when the health impact rewards that they could hope to capture from reaching additional patients would be worth more than what they would lose on selling below cost. Second, the Health Impact Fund would end the neglect of the diseases of poverty, at least the major diseases of poverty, because now a good chunk of money can be made by inventing a drug that would help a lot of poor people, because your reward is completely independent of how rich or poor your patients are. If you make people better, you get paid, and whether it's Bill Gates or the poorest of the poor in Africa. And here, research companies in the developing countries would have no disadvantage, right? Normally, they are heavily disadvantaged against the established firms, because to reach the frontier, the cutting edge, you would have to spend billions and billions of dollars, because the Pfizers and Mercks and Bayers of this world already have long libraries of molecules. They've done an enormous amount of research on cancer and diabetes and heart disease and so forth. But with the diseases of the poor, they haven't yet worked on them. And so here, fledgling companies in the developing world would be much more competitive. The Health Impact Fund would also boost cost effectiveness for the reasons that I mentioned. You don't have to patent in many jurisdictions. 1 or 2 would be enough. Actually, you could get the reward without patenting anywhere. And you don't really need to patent because nobody's going to compete with you if you sell at the rock bottom lowest possible price. It's just not going to be attractive. Plus, even if somebody did sell your medicine, you would still get the reward for the health impact because it is your medicine. You were the one registering it with the Health Impact Fund. Litigation would be much reduced. Competitive marketing, this pointless spending of competing advertising dollars, would not occur. Counterfeiting, a major burden in the developing world, where when drugs are very expensive, people sell lookalikes, diluted versions of the same drug because people are so desperate to get the drug. That would be very much less frequent because if the real thing is available very, very cheaply, it doesn't really pay to bring onto the market a fake lookalike version. And gaming and lobbying would be much reduced, and of course deadweight losses would completely disappear. Deadweight losses are those foregone sales where it would be lucrative both for the seller and for the buyer to sell, in my example earlier with the curve, for example, at $50. It would be a lucrative trade, but the monopolist cannot sell at $50 because if they sold at 50 to some, then nobody would pay the $100, which by assumption is the optimal monopoly price. The Health Impact Fund has also a bonus. It alleviates last mile problems. It focuses innovators for the first time on actually achieving health impact, which what you would think is what we all want health companies to focus on. Currently, pharmaceutical companies are rewarded simply for sales, and they have no interest in what happens to the drug after it crosses the counter. Whether it gets flushed down the toilet, whether you feed it to your dog, it doesn't matter. So long as the medicine has been purchased, the pharmaceutical company has made its money. But with the Health Impact Fund, a lot more is at stake. The company has to actually achieve health impact with its drug, and so will take an interest in the efficacy of its drug, delivering it fresh to the patients, targeting those patients who can benefit the most, making sure that patients can afford the drug, making sure it gets carefully prescribed so that the doctors give exact instructions as to how to optimally take the drug, and of course also looking after compliance and adherence, that patients take the drug as intended. All these things now make a difference to the bottom line of the pharmaceutical innovators, and innovators will therefore try to attend to these things, try to overcome any obstacle between their drug and its achieving its optimal health impact. We are now, excitingly, finally getting to the point where we can pilot the scheme, and we have a company called Janssen, which is a unit of your baby oil people, Johnson & Johnson. So Janssen has given us a $2 million commitment to award a joint pilot in India. We may be able to do a second pilot in South Africa with the same drug. The drug is bedaquiline, or the brand name Ceturo, and it's against multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, which is a very nasty problem in many developing countries, and of course there's a significant danger that it jumps over to the rich countries as well. You may remember a few years ago Mr. Speaker, a wonderful American businessman who caught XDR-TB in South Africa and felt that he was important enough to immediately fly home to Atlanta, and did so via Canada, endangering a whole plane load of other passengers. He just simply took a commercial airline, flew first class, and so on. So XDR-TB, MDR-TB, these are diseases that could very easily jump from an infected person to any one of us or anybody in general, and they could spread and lead to quite a nasty pandemic. So it is important, I think, to have this drug, Ceturo, very carefully rolled out, to use it widely, and to nip the spread of XDR and MDR-TB in the bud if we can. What J&J will do, they will contribute the drug for free and also give us a lot of expertise. What we need to do is come up with funding, and we actually have some EU funding now in the amount of €2 million for the measurement part. and also very carefully preserving the drug's efficacy. So we have to take very careful steps, especially in developing country settings, to make sure that everybody who gets the drug really takes it in exactly the right way, so that these people get cured and drug resistance doesn't develop. If somebody would take a shortened course, stop taking the drug after a certain time, that could be quite dangerous for creating drug resistance. The benefits of the pilot would be that we would develop an integrated metric and measurement methodology. We would define procedures for its reliable application, promote integrative and regional systems in healthcare, and serve, of course, the patients in the pilot area, which would be Mumbai in India. Quickly to conclude, this basic idea of funding innovation in this new way that avoids the dilemma between innovation on the one hand and access on the other could be adapted in other areas as well. One obvious area is clean green technologies, where we are also now hampering the diffusion of green technologies by hiking up their price, by allowing the innovator to charge licensing fees for the use of that innovation. In the developing world, very often we find antiquated technologies used because people cannot afford the newer, cleaner, greener technologies. With agricultural technologies, it's the same problem, that we could have seeds, for example, that reduce the need for fertilizers and pesticides, that deliver higher nutrient yields, but we are not using them because there is an intellectual property fee embedded in them. And that, again, is very foolish because we all bear the consequences. A third extension would be education, where we could have basic educational materials available for free on, for example, an internet-based platform that everybody could use in the world with certification and so on, marginal cost pricing there, and pay for the quality of the achievements that people derive from that educational platform on the basis of the quality of the learning and the greater qualifications that people have to get jobs. So I'm working on that third problem now with former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. So that's it. Thank you.